Hello, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another book rant. Today, I'm going to be covering this book, Robinson Crusoe, written by Daniel Defoe. Now, this isn't a used book, and for one of the books I've had since 2009 or 2010, it's in really good condition. Despite that, I've read it many times, and I think it's been kept in really good condition because I haven't taken it out when I'm hiking or when I'm camping or on too many trips. I read this at home. Now, Robinson Crusoe was first published in 1719, and the Bantam Classic Edition, which this one is, was first published in October 1981. This reissue is from December 2006. And the illustration for the cover painting is I Stood Like One Thunderstruck, an illustration for Robinson Crusoe by N.C. Wyeth, courtesy of the Wilmington Institute, Wilmington, Delaware. Now, Robinson Crusoe is an amazing, pivotal work of English literature. In modern culture, it's left its notes too. For example, the phrase my man Friday is generally referred to like someone who is reliable, someone that is all that you can always count on. And in this book, Robinson Crusoe's servant, his companion, is named Friday. And that servant, that companion, is native, but not necessarily represented in a good way. It's very of its time. That's the best way to put it. The other major cultural reference I'm aware of is also partially why I first read this book and why I really loved it. When I worked at a summer camp back in 2008 and 2009, my first paid jobs, the staff of the camp would do the Friday night campfire the night before all the kids were supposed to leave. It was a Cub Scout camp, and so they would get there on Sunday afternoon and stay until Saturday morning. And after that Friday night campfire, all the staff would gather around after cleaning up and making sure the kids got back to their campsites, and we would do a little like a fireside chat in a way. We would talk with each other, make sure how we were doing, something that was good that week, something that we didn't like, and then we would put out the fires as a group. At the end, we would do something like a singing circle in a way, and as I recall, it was right over left, and you would hold the left hand of the person to your left, right over left, everyone in a circle, and then certain songs would be sung. And one of those songs that was sung was the Gilligan's Isle theme song. In the Gilligan's Island theme song, you can hear a reference to Robinson Crusoe. I believe, if I recall correctly, and this is memory, I'm not going to look online. No lights, no phone, no motor car, not a single luxury. Like Robinson Crusoe, it's primitive as can be. So gather here each week, my friends, you're sure to catch a smile from seven stranded castaways here at Gilligan's Isle. In our way, we would replace the number, seven stranded castaways, with however many people were on staff that week. So if it was 31, you would say, from 31 stranded castaways, and then instead of saying Gilligan's Isle, you would say the camp that we worked at. So from 31 stranded castaways here at Camp PMI. And it was in this way that I first became familiar with the name Robinson Crusoe. And I looked it up, and after realizing it was a book that I could find at the library, I read it there, checked it back in, and I really loved it. So, using some of my money, we went to the Borders and I bought this copy of Robinson Crusoe. And that fire circle, that singing circle was really fun. I, it is still ingrained in me, the song that we sung. We also sang a couple other songs, usually just the first verses. So, like, another one that we sang was Good Night, Sweetheart. Well, it's time to go, which is an older song from like the 50s. I'm not entirely certain why we sang that one. We also sang Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. Again, I don't know why we sang that because, as far as I know, that's like a spiritual that I don't know how those songs got into the cycle, but the Gilligan's Island theme song was the way we ended each time. The line comes up when the lightning starts crashing. The weather started getting rough. The tiny ship was tossed. If not for the courage of the fearless crew, the minnow would be lost. During that time, hand over hand, we're like crashing around as if the waves were crashing against the boat. The weather was getting rough. People would make lightning sounds, that kind, thunder sounds, that kind of thing. The cracks, the booms, that kind of thing. So that experience instilled in me the drive to read this book because this book was referenced during that sequence. And partly why I enjoy this book is because when I read it, I'm looking back at those memories. But enough ranting about why I read this book. I'm going to start ranting about the book itself. The Bantam Classic version on the first page inside the cover says Daniel Defoe was born Daniel Foe in London in 1660. He assumed the more genteel D when he was 35 years old. His father, a tallow chandler, sent him to Reverend Charles Morton's academy to study for the ministry, but Defoe turned to trading and later to the brick and tile business. Both bankrupted him, and from then on he was plagued by debt. It was perhaps inevitable that Defoe, an outspoken man, would become a political journalist. As a Puritan, he believed God had given him a mission to print the truth, that is, to proselytize on religion and politics, and in fact, he became a prolific pamphleteer satirizing the hypocrisies of both church and state. Defoe admired William III, and his poem, The True-Born Englishman, in 1701, won him the king's friendship. But an ill-timed satire on high church extremists, The Shortest Way with the Dissenters, published during Queen Anne's reign, resulted in his being pilloried and imprisoned for seditious libel in 1703. Rescued by the Tory minister Robert Harley, whom he later served as writer and spy, Defoe went on to publish The Review, 1704 to 1713, one of London's earliest and best miscellaneous journals. Defoe is the father of the English novel, preceding both Fielding and Richardson. As James Joyce observed, Defoe is the first English author to write without imitating or adapting foreign works, to create without literary models, and to infuse into the creatures of his pen a truly national spirit, to devise for himself an artistic form which is perhaps without precedent. Defoe's important novel, Robinson Crusoe, has been acknowledged by Samuel Johnson as one of the few books written by mere man that was wished longer by its readers, and it has been praised by Virginia Woolf as a simplicity. Daniel Defoe died of a lethargy on April 24th, 1731, in Ropemaker's Alley, London, and was buried along with such Puritans as John Bunyan in Bunhill Fields. He is an important author in English history, and more than that, what his book serves as is a good reading material in English literature programs and English language programs across the world. My stepmother, she is from Chile, and when she was learning English in undergrad, she has an English degree from a Chilean university, I'm not certain which. Some of the books she had to read included The Little Prince, which she absolutely loved, and another book she read in her undergrad was Robinson Crusoe, and she loved it. And we once spent an afternoon just talking about it and what it meant to us and parts that we really enjoyed. But the book itself is mostly about different phases of his life, his entire life, really. It opens with this line: I was born in the year 1632 in the city of York, of a good family, though not of that country, my father being a foreigner of Bremen who first settled at Hull. He got a good estate by merchandise, and, leaving off his trade, lived afterward at York, from whence he married my mother, whose relations were named Robinson, a very good family in that country, and from whom I was called Robinson Crusoe. But by the usual corruption of words in England, we are now called, nay, we call ourselves, and write our name, Crusoe. And so my companions have always called me. Robinson Crusoe was the youngest of three brothers, but one died in a war and the other disappeared. He effectively ran off to do what he wanted and then was never heard from again. What became of my second brother I never knew, any more than my father or mother did know what was become of me. Being the third son of the family and not bred to any trade, my head began to be filled very early with rambling thoughts. And so he was educated, he was raised to effectively apprentice to a tradesman, and then he didn't like that. So he ran off and tried to become a ship's hand. That didn't work out, and he absolutely did not like the experience, but through his travels, he ended up being captured by the Moors. He ended up getting himself free. He was a servant that was trusted to some degree with a fishing boat, and when he could, he escaped. But then he brought news of his shipwreck to his first shipwreck to the widow of the captain, and in Portugal they ended up with some money, and with that money she lived a comfortable life. And then Robinson went to Brazil and there he started making money as a plantation owner. Part of his estate that he had set up was that his money, some of his money was being sent to that widow so that he could take care of her with the money he earned. He wasn't a particularly virtuous man. He wasn't religious. And he wasn't, he was a slave owner. So that is something to consider in looking at this book. He ended up accompanying one of his shipments and getting shipwrecked on a deserted island in the Caribbean. This island had goats, I think, had plenty of birds, and what he ended up being stranded with was the ship's cat and the ship's dog. He also was stranded with a lot of food and some grains of rice and other grain in sacks. He spent much of his early time setting up a shelter with a roof over his head and finding ways to survive and thrive on this island. One of the few things that was saved was a Holy Bible. And on the walls of the shelter he made for himself, he kept track of the number of days that he was aware of. He ate what food remained, and he tried to survive off of it. And all the time he was reading the Holy Bible, the scripture that was his only link to civilization, and through it, he went through several phases of faith. He went through, a born-again Christian moment, and then eventually he went through a phase where he lapsed in faith because how could you keep on doing this to me? Even when I see someone on the distant horizon, they don't even look to me. Why am I abandoned here all by my lonesome? And then eventually he comes back to his faith. It's a story about a religious journey to become a better Christian man. All the while, he's thanking God for all the different parts of his life that he has salvaged because of God's graces. He ends up with goats and having goat's milk and um, some amount of meat that he can eat. The ship's dog eventually dies, but a parrot survives, and he stays with the parrot until it eventually leaves him. The cats run amok on the island. Overall, he is satisfied with his life for some years. And then he encounters a footprint in the sand. In a lot of copies of this book, the cover art is of Robinson discovering that footprint in the sand. He discovers that footprint and realizes he's not entirely alone, and this puts the fear of death in him, that someone else might be out there, but the only people he knows to be in those islands are cannibals. So he hides in fear until eventually he dares to explore. And there he finds a young man who is about to be killed and eaten by a group of Caribbean natives. Robinson, realizing that he has been sent in this moment to help this man, attacks the cannibals and then saves this young man. And there's a period of education and cultural misunderstanding. The saved person wants to eat the fallen humans, but Robinson forbids it entirely because eating humans is a sin in the eyes of God. He teaches this man to live a Christian life, how to read English, how to speak English haltingly, and this man he names Friday after the day he believes to be the day of the week he saved the young man. I think at some point in the book he realizes he's off by a number of days, perhaps days that he was sick and comatose and not able to count the number of days that passed. So the man Friday is really just named after the day and not necessarily the day that Robinson saved him. But now he has a companion, and this companion helps him out. He is now getting to be about 50 years old, and or in his 40s or early 50s. He needs some help doing a lot of the physical labor that he can't do anymore. And Friday helps him out and honors him and respects him because not only did Robinson save him, Robinson saved him in a Christian sense as well. Eventually, Robinson ends up seeing some captured Spaniards being offered, and Robinson and Friday free them, and then manage to get free from the island. And it starts looking up. There's a colony of Englishmen on that island, though it suffers terribly due to, I think, native attack or something like that. When he comes back, he reinforces it and teaches them how to live on this island. And among his travels, he ends up going to France. And also, throughout all his travels, Friday is with him every time. Further, it turns out that a plantation owner friend of his, kept up Robinson's estate in the hopes that Robinson would one day come back. Though I think eventually he sold it. What ended up happening was that Robinson came back to a lump sum of money, as well as finding out that that widow was still alive, and he had been sending her some money posthumously, But she was thrilled to see him alive again, and he had been helping her all this time. His friend had helped him out all this time, and Robinson realizes that even though he was stranded, God had not abandoned him. To quote, "I went down afterwards into Yorkshire, but my father was dead and my mother and all the family extinct, except that I found 2 sisters and 2 of the children of one of my brothers, as I had long ago been given over for dead, there had been no provision made for me, so that, in a word, I found nothing to relieve or assist me, and that little money I had would not do much for me as to settling in the world. I met with one piece of gratitude indeed, which I did not expect, and this was that the master of the ship whom I had so happily delivered, and by the same means saved the ship and cargo, having given a very handsome account to the owners of the manner how I had saved the lives of the men in the ship, they invited me to meet them and some other merchants concerned, and altogether made me a very handsome compliment upon the subject, and a present of almost 200 pounds sterling. So he now has two sisters whom are married. He also has two nephews from one of his brothers, presumably the second one, but it doesn't make it clear if it was the oldest or the second brother that had those kids. My true friend, the widow, earnestly dissuaded me from it, and so far prevailed with me that for almost 7 years she prevented my running abroad, during which time I took my two nephews, the children of one of my brothers, into my care. The eldest having something of his own, I bred up as a gentleman, and gave him a settlement of some addition to his estate after my decease. The other I put out to a captain of a ship, and after 5 years, finding him a sensible, bold, enterprising young fellow, I put him into a good ship and sent him to sea. And this young fellow afterwards drew me in, as old as I was, to farther adventures myself. In the meantime, I, in part, settled myself here, for first of all I married, and that not either to my disadvantage or dissatisfaction, and had 3 children, 2 sons and 1 daughter. But my wife dying, and my nephew coming home with good success from a voyage to Spain, my inclination to go abroad and his opportunity prevailed and emerged me to go in his ship as a private trader to the East Indies in the year 1694. And then he ends up traveling until the final sentence, all these things with some very surprising incidents in some new adventures of my own for 10 years more, I may perhaps give a farther account of hereafter. It ends with a to be continued, effectively, which was really fantastic. I didn't expect that. And it's a fascinating book, all these different adventures in the one amazing life of this man. Fiction, but amazing nonetheless. And this book captured me when I was a young man. I, was 15 or 16 when I read it, and I've read it numerous times throughout the years because it is just fascinating. From a finding faith perspective, I'm more deist, but reading this helped me to process my thoughts. And it's just a fascinating book. It's a couple centuries old, but it's just fascinating. And I think if you get a chance to read this book, I know this is one of my longer videos and you've suffered through all this with me now, but if you get a chance to read this book, pick it up because you will enjoy it. It has plenty of content for all sorts of readers. My name is Wild Stag, and thank you for tuning in to another book rant.